I'm Bryan Llenas for FoxNews.com. Voting is what's on everybody's mind this month, but what if that right was essentially taken away? My next guest knows a lot about this. His mom voted in Florida in 2008, but she has since moved to Puerto Rico and is now not able to vote in this election. And joining me now is Gabe Gonzalez. He's a news producer for Mike. Thank you so much for being here, Gabe.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So your mother, she voted the last time in 2008. And then she decided to move to Puerto Rico, and this is going to come as a surprise to some people. She's now unable to vote because she's on the U.S. territory, U.S. Commonwealth of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, so it's actually mostly a residency issue. She was originally born in Puerto Rico. She moved to Florida and established residency there. That's where I was born. That's where my family grew up. And in about 2012, she decided she wanted to move back to Puerto Rico. And something that I asked her at the time was whether or not she'd be voting in any elections at that time, any federal elections. Because Puerto Rico is actually a U.S. Commonwealth and operates under a bunch of laws that were mostly passed between 1917 and 1950-something, right? So that status as a Commonwealth sort of leaves Puerto Ricans in limbo, where they are U.S. citizens and they pay federal taxes, basically everything except federal income taxes.
Social Security, Medicare, they pay into that system.
Absolutely.
They are American citizens.
Yes.
And yet, because your mother decided to move back, once you're on the island, you are unable to vote. And not only that, they lack a representative vote in the Congress. They don't have a senator, and that's a big problem. I mean, so what is your mom feeling now with this election and the fact that she can't take part?
Yeah, I mean, I think in part there's frustration, not just with my mom, but among many Puerto Ricans that they don't get a say in the federal government that essentially has pretty much autonomy over what happens on that island. So a lot of Puerto Ricans point to the Promesa bill that was recently passed to try to help with the economic situation there. They basically appointed a board of 7 individuals that Puerto Ricans had no say in. And that board of individuals is not beholden to any legislator or politician in Puerto Rico. So I think a lot of Puerto Ricans are really feeling that disparity in terms of being U.S. citizens and paying into our government, but not really getting the representation they deserve for the taxation they receive.
And that's the biggest issue. Is you have a situation on the island right now, which is really dealing with major economic issues. People fleeing the island in record numbers and coming to the United States. What's interesting, though, is actually when when Puerto Ricans come into the United States, in places like Florida, where the vote matters in this election, they can take part in the vote as soon as they land. As soon as they put their feet on Florida mainland, they can easily vote in this election. So the rules are just really backwards on that.
Well, they actually have to establish residency. That's the crazy thing. Yeah. So even if they're living in Florida or just moving to Florida, you have to establish residency. So what's crazy is that my mom could have lived in Puerto Rico for a majority of the year, but if she hadn't changed her residency, she technically still could have been able to vote, which is kind of a crazy thing. It's very similar with Americans voting abroad. As long as you have a residency established in the United States, you can send it.
And Puerto Ricans can take part in the primary.
They can, yes.
And yet they still don't have a say. And right now, when I was talking to you about the economic situation, $70 billion in debt, unable to pay the bills, and yet there is a limit as to how much they can control. The federal government is essentially telling them what they can do, and Puerto Ricans are saying, I'm invested in my community here, I'm an American citizen, but yet I have no say in how you're choosing to help me.
Totally, very much so. And I think it's a frustration that status hasn't really changed in the last 70-plus years, you know what I mean? Puerto Rico is a U.S. Commonwealth because it was won in the Spanish-American War, right? So it's wild that a lot of these laws haven't caught up to date, and there are a bunch of things going on, you know what I mean? Very backward import taxes through the Jones Act in particular, which some people speculate increases the cost of imported goods like 15 to 20%. So there is an added cost to being a Commonwealth.
You were featured in HBO's Habla y Vota. What is that about?
Yeah, so that's actually a push on behalf of HBO Latino to get Latinos around the country, regardless of political affiliation, to have their voice heard and get out and vote. And in my segment specifically, I talk about another snafu my mom had while voting back in 2000, where she and my dad were both voting for different candidates. And it kind of discouraged her at first. And I think she felt partly uneducated and partly discouraged from voicing her opinion because of that disagreement. So I told a story about how I encouraged her to go to the polls at age 10, which is something I did do. I was born a very old, very politically inclined man. So,
I'm an old soul as well.
I know, yeah, exactly.
So now, what's your message to Puerto Ricans, message to Puerto Ricans out there, because Florida is really the key to this election.
It is, yeah.
Puerto Ricans living in the I-4 corridor can really switch, and what we're seeing right now, early voting, pretty good in terms of Hispanics showing up in ways we have never seen the Latino vote show. Are you hearing that and feeling that with people and friends your age and in your community?
Yeah, I am. And I think everyone realizes the stakes are particularly high this election, especially for people of color and Latinos. What I'm seeing is a lot of Latinos aware of a really poor history of voter turnout in the United States. And the funny thing is, in Puerto Rico, when Puerto Ricans are voting for their governor and their own legislative body, they turn out in like the 70–80%.
Oh, yeah, even in places like Guam.
Absolutely,
too,
yeah.
And other U.S. territories.
Yeah.
They have major voter participation. But with Hispanics here in the United States, you're talking about a voter participation rate that's like, it's 48%.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's lower than any of the big groups. So hopefully we will see a change with generations like yours, our generation coming up.
Yeah, definitely.
My parents are Dominican, and they, you know, they're taking part, and now I'm taking part more. And so hopefully that'll continue to show as the Hispanic vote shows more and more, flexes its big muscle.
I hope so.
Well, anyway, thank you so much for being here, Gabe, and really just reminding people about the importance of voting, and really that these are issues that matter. There are 3.5 million Puerto Ricans in the U.S. Commonwealth that are unable to take part in the most basic and most important part of our democracy. Something to think about when you go out there and think about whether or not you should cast your ballot on Tuesday, November 7th. 8th. 7th? 8th?
8th? 28th?
Jeez,
no, it's the 8th.
It's the 8th. Anyway, I'm Bryan Llenas with FoxNews.com. See you all later.